hang in there with me. We're going to tie all this together in just a moment, but let me remind you that I'm in my 70s. So I am a quintessential boomer. Now, when I started school back in the late 1950s, 1957, when I started first grade, I think, we went to school and we were taught some things. We were taught arithmetic, we were taught reading, we were taught writing, we were taught the alphabet, we were taught basic science. What we were not taught was gender ideology. Why? Because, well, back in the 1950s, that was not a thing. It was not a thing in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, and it seems like it is something that has just kind of emerged within the last few years, maybe the last 10 years, 20 at the very most, but it's become a hot topic in recent years. So how far back do you have to go? Well, how far back does humanity go? We have known throughout all of humanity that there are two genders, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me go back to a quote from a newspaper that is called La Prensa Grafica. This is the English version, obviously, but they're taking note of what's going on in El Salvador, where the government has put an end to so-called gender ideology being taught in government-owned schools. Here is the quote. And the reason I chose this particular sentence, it's not that long, is because notice how comprehensive they are in making sure this ideology is not being taught. Okay, here's the quote. It is taken care in all educational materials and programming, didactic, that means taught, didactic resources, plans, text, and workbooks, administrative documents, websites. Yeah, they're covering all the bases. Learning guides, multimedia objects, and other documentation related to the Ministry of Education, Science, and Technology's daily work does not contain or make allusion to said ideology. Said ideology, again, being gender ideology. That's what the Minister of Education said. So you cannot teach gender ideology in El Salvador anymore, and this comes on the heels of the election of Nayib Bukele, president, considered to be a conservative, right of center. The far left, the woke left, doesn't like him, so of course they're going to call him a dictator. There's other words for him that they use, but I'm not going to use those terms because I don't want to reinforce him. Okay, that's what's happening now. How do we tie all this together? This is the important part. First thing we need to understand is this. Are you ready? Now, stop whatever you do and pay attention. Gender identity is a form of gender confusion, which is a form of identity confusion, which is a method of thought reform. I'm not going to read that again, but it's thought reform. We'll just summarize it. The strategy is kind of simple. What you do is you take the victim and you make him or her to question his or her identity. And then what do? Well, everybody wants to have an identity, so they will seek a new identity. And the people who are brainwashing these people impose an identity that is compliant to the reformer, to the brainwasher, to the thought reformer. Cults do this all the time. If you join a cult, one of the first things they do is they give you a new name. They're changing your identity. They make sure that you wear your hair a certain way. You ever seen Hare Krishnas? Why do they wear their hair like that? They ought to call themselves hairless Krishnas. They shave their heads, or the men do. They wear these funny clothes, the pink color, red color clothes. When you join a cult, they make you do weird things like this. What they're doing is they're changing your identity. This is what they're doing in government-owned schools. They're changing the identity of the students. They're brainwashing them. It's thought reform. That's my opinion. Second thing we need to take away from this is we need to understand that the woke left pretends that any kind of resistance, like what I'm doing right now, is an expression of bigotry and discrimination. We're being mean to these people that they're brainwashing. They don't put it in those terms, but in essence, that's what they're saying. Because they're saying this is, just kind of like a natural thing. And if you don't accept it, then you're being hateful. Yeah, that's what they do. Third thing we understand about this is we tie these together. There's only two genders. There's a legal term called sua sponte, and a means of its own accord. Give you an example. The earth is round. You don't have to go to court to prove that. It's sua sponte. Everybody knows it of its own accord. The law of gravity, sua sponte. It's obvious. Everybody knows it. You don't have to prove the law of gravity in court. There are only two genders. Sua sponte. Evident of its own accord. You don't have to prove it in court until now. So we have this intrinsic truth, as we said earlier, has been evident throughout all of humanity. I mean, we're talking back thousands and thousands of years, that has not even been brought into question until just, very, very recently, a few years ago. Now, this is what really bothers me about this. This is the fourth observation, is the fact that so many people can be misled and be that vulnerable, that they're being vulnerable, they're being malleable and vulnerable to thought reform. And it seems like nobody, well, obviously there are some bodies, the guy in El Salvador being an example, but it seems like there are very few people who are resisting this effort at thought reform. I don't know about you, but I'm going to resist because I know it's bunk.